to Russia's war now, and Ukraine says it used the US-made Patriot air defense system to intercept a Russian hypersonic missile.
Yeah, this is the first time the newly acquired system has been used to take down one of Moscow's most modern missiles. CNN's Sam Kiley joining us now live from Kyiv. Sam, I mean, this sounds pretty significant, like a big win for Ukraine.
A really big win, or an act of exceptional marksmanship using a very sophisticated piece of weaponry, or luck. And I think that the developers of the Patriot missile systems, and in particular the United States and the Pentagon, will be looking at this incident in detail to try to establish which of those three things it was, because this is a missile system, an anti-missile missile system that was developed to take out missiles that predate the hypersonic missile that the Kinzhal that the Russians have been using occasionally in Ukraine. This is a missile that the Russians claim can fly at 10 times the speed of sound. In technical terms, too fast for the Patriot. But the Ukrainians are saying that they did successfully shoot one down. Now, they're very short indeed of Patriot missile systems. They say they're very short indeed of all forms of aerial defenses. So this has been a major morale booster for the Ukrainians. And it also represents, from the Russian perspective, a bit of a slap in the face, in that they did assume that these Kinzhal missiles, although they don't have large numbers of them, were pretty invulnerable. Now they will have to take extra precautions to protect those missiles that they have been firing into this country. And they fire them at a time when they try to overwhelm the systems here with other missiles and drones, from the very primitive Iranian-made Shahed drones all the way through to the Russian-made cruise missile systems. They fire swarms of these things, and then on top of them fire these hypersonic missiles. So it is a significant step for the Ukrainians, but we don't really know the technical detail, whether or not it was basically a lucky shot.
Yeah, still some questions there. Sam, what do you know about Russian officials evacuating civilians in the Zaporizhia region? This is ahead of an expected counter-offensive. The UN's nuclear watchdog says they're closely monitoring. What do you know?
Well, Victor, we know that there are claims of these evacuations circulating on social media and being made by the exiled Ukrainian leadership, particularly of the town of Melitopol, which is a very important town to the south of Zaporizhia. The town of Zaporizhia, which is still in Ukrainian hands, and the Zaporizhia nuclear power station, which is in Russian hands. Essentially, Melitopol has been a bit of a hotbed of partisan activity on social media. There has been images of very large queues of vehicles leaving the city. There have also been reports coming from even Russian officials of other towns being evacuated closer to the front lines in anticipation of a Ukrainian offensive along that very long front line there that essentially runs east-west from Zaporizhia all the way through to north of Mariupol, which of course was flattened by the Russians when they captured it last year. This is seen as preparations being made by the civilian and Russian authorities in the south of the country that they've captured at the beginning of this war, ahead of a Ukrainian offensive in the summer. The assumption is that they will be attacking in the south, but of course the Ukrainians are also being trained by NATO in maneuver warfare, and feints and fake attacks will be very much part of any future offensive that they do conduct.
All right, Sam Kiley, appreciate your reporting as always. Thank you. And we do begin this hour in Ukraine, where the mayor of Kyiv is now reporting explosions in the capital. Vitaly Klitschko says several people have been injured in two separate districts, and a two-story building has been hit by falling wreckage from a drone. Now, this comes as Ukraine accuses Russian forces of trying to exhaust the country's air defense system. Ukraine's military says Russia has been using a variety of missiles and air-launched weapons against several regions, both in the north and the south. And in Zaporizhia region, one Ukrainian official claims Russian soldiers are dressing as civilians in an attempt to flee. Russian-installed authorities, meantime, say they're moving hundreds of residents from the front lines in anticipation of Ukrainian counteroffensive. Meantime, on those front lines in the east, top commanders say Russian forces are increasing their attacks on Bakhmut, as the Ukrainian military remains determined to keep Russia from capturing the city by Tuesday, when Moscow holds its World War II Victory Day parade. Now, Ukraine says Russia is doing everything possible to take Bakhmut, including sending in more forces. And that includes Wagner fighters. Just days ago, the head of the Russian mercenary group had threatened to pull his men out of the fight because of a lack of ammunition. He now claims his fighters are advancing in Bakhmut as they wait for more supplies. CNN's Sam Kiley has our update now from Kyiv.
Fighting continues to be bloody and merciless in the east of the country, in particular around the city of Bakhmut, where the Ukrainians have suggested that it's possible that the Wagner group or elements supporting the Wagner group have even been using incendiary devices in that battle. This coming as the leader of the mercenary organization has backtracked on his threat to leave the city and hand over to Chechen fighters. This is very much part of an ongoing soap opera, effectively, led by Mr. Prigozhin, who has been tweeting and making public statements since effectively the beginning of this war, highly critical of the Kremlin and particularly the Russian Ministry of Defense. He now says that he is getting the ammunition that he needs, so he won't be pulling his troops out for the foreseeable future. But all eyes really are on where and when, or even if, the Ukrainians are going to be launching a summer offensive. There have been mass troop movements. There is a lot of talk from the Ukrainians about an offensive, but no real signs yet on the ground that anything is especially imminent. Sam Kiley, CNN in Kyiv.
Joining me now from Washington, retired U.S. Air Force Colonel and CNN military analyst Cedric Leighton. Good to have you weigh in on these issues. We've had quite a few days. The Wagner group leader, he made those dramatic threats to pull out of Bakhmut. Turned out it was quite a performance, right? It looks like his troops are staying put. Now, does this incident give you any insight into what's going on with either the Wagner group or the Russian military?
Well, Paula, I think it's, it's kind of the battle of the tantrums, if you will. And in this particular case, Prigozhin's tantrum seems to have won the day for him. In other words, he gets to get weapons and ammunition, gets a resupply line to his troops in Bakhmut that didn't appear to have that good of a resupply line. And he gets to stay in that horrible meat grinder. So in some ways, it might, be considered a victory for Prigozhin, but in other ways, it's a Pyrrhic victory because, staying in that meat grinder, it doesn't do anybody any favors, and least of all him.
Yeah, but when I say that it's a performance, I'm, not trying to be trite. It seemed that it was a message to someone, and yet if you think all he wanted from that was ammunition, well, that would be pretty naive to think that. It was clearly some kind of propaganda purpose.
Absolutely. Well, there's propaganda and there's a power struggle going on, Paula. And what this basically means to me is that Prigozhin, let it be known that he has a military element that could be withdrawn and could potentially put at risk Russia's front line. And if that front line had collapsed, that would have been a calamity for the Russian forces. So what Prigozhin is doing is he's flexing his muscles in a way. He is, in a position where he can, in essence, complain and make sure that he gets what he wants in this particular case. But he is basically vying for as much power as he can possibly get.
Right. And that gives us turns our attention now to Ukraine's counteroffensive. It could start as early as this week. Do you think expectations are too high at this point, especially if what Ukraine is looking for is a decisive blow to the Russian military in this war?
Yeah, if you're going to mount a decisive blow in an operation like this or in a conflict like this, there's got to be an element of surprise here. And, right now, it seems to me at least that we have telegraphed way too much. The Ukrainians have telegraphed way too much. The West has telegraphed way too much that this offensive is going to happen. And the only thing that's missing are the specific details as to time and place. But we believe it's going to happen this week. We believe it's going to happen probably in the South. and we believe it's going to affect the approaches to Crimea. So that is, a major area that shouldn't be a big surprise to the Russians. But if the Ukrainians have learned mobility warfare, if they've learned combined arms operations, putting all the elements of the military force together in a coordinated fashion, then they could still achieve some successes, but they won't be as dramatic as they would have been had there been the element of surprise.
Yeah, it's such a good point, right? We've been talking about this for months, it seems now. And I have to ask you, strategically, the U.S., the allies, have they given Ukraine enough capability at this point? And has it arrived in time?
Well, it's mixed. The verdict on that is definitely mixed. I think that some of the capabilities, such as the Patriot missile system, which reportedly has shot down a Kinzhal hypersonic missile, that's a major plus for the Ukrainians. However, there are only going to be two Patriot batteries in Ukraine. They will need far more than that in order to mount an effective air defense and missile defense for their country. The other thing that, of course, is missing is required quantity of tanks and, of course, aircraft. The Ukrainians want the F-16. They're not getting the F-16 until after all of this is done, if at all. And that, of course, will provide them, with a significant lack of capability at this particular point, and that could have a significant impact on their ability to perform.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what the blowback is from Ukraine if and when that happens. Again, some pivotal months ahead for sure as the weather warms up in Ukraine. Retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
You bet, Paula.
In Ukraine, the Russian mercenary group fighting in Bakhmut might not be leaving the battle after all. Last week, the head of the group said his fighters were dying because ammunition supplies from Moscow were drying up, and he would be pulling his remaining forces from what has been one of the bloodiest battles in the war. CNN's Sam Kiley has more.
In the ongoing macabre soap opera that is the Russian saga in the battle for Bakhmut, the latest part of this drama is that Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner private military company, as he likes to call himself, the mercenary organization, has gone back on his threat to withdraw his troops from the city on May the 10th and hand over to Chechens under the command of Kadyrov. And that is because he is saying he is now being promised the ammunition that up until now he was claiming that the Russian Ministry of Defense had been denying him. Now, all of this is part of a mysterious ongoing spat that he has with the Ministry of Defense inside Russia. He's frequently complaining and very publicly critical of the leadership of the Russian generals. He's recently recruited former Russian generals. But I think that really this is something of a distraction because as far as the Ukrainians are concerned, they've been delighted if the Wagner group had left and had to be replaced, because it would have left a period of vulnerability in that very bloody fight for a town that the Ukrainians say they're happy to kill Russians in, but as far as they're concerned, doesn't really have any strategic interest or advantage, unlike their preparations for what they say is a planned summer offensive. All eyes are on the Ukrainians to see where and how this offensive may begin. There's a lot of speculation that it might get underway in the south, perhaps with the attempt at liberating the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant there. There have been reports from the Russian side, or the Russian-held areas of Ukraine, of mass evacuations, of looted goods, of civilians, and indeed of some military elements, particularly from the city of Melitopol, appearing on social media and being claimed by elements within the Ukrainian administration. Now, that would be a sign that the Russians are expecting something.
All right, Sam Kiley, thank you so much. Let's bring in now Bill Browder. He is the CEO of Hermitage Capital Management, and he's also the author of 2 books, Red Notice and more recently Freezing Order. They are based on his experiences in Russia and becoming a target of Vladimir Putin himself. Bill, good to see you. So what do you think is happening here between Vladimir Putin and the head of this mercenary group?
Well, I don't think anything is happening between Putin and the head of the mercenary group. Putin has always managed the people under him with these types of conflicts. They're always sort of going at it with each other. So the mercenary group head, Prigozhin, is fighting with the Minister of Defense and various other officials there. But Putin is sort of the puppet master who kind of has them weaken each other, strengthen each other, and all sorts of other things. The most important thing you need to understand here is that whoever is, I mean, we shouldn't believe a word these people are saying, but the one thing we can say for sure is that there is a problem inside of the Russians' effective military offensive. It's not working out. They're losing thousands, tens of thousands of soldiers, and this is before the Ukrainians have really gotten to work with their counteroffensive.
Mm-hmm. When you said you shouldn't believe a word, that was going to be my next question, which is, should we believe the head of the Wagner group that it was so desperate that they were willing to pull out? Might that be sort of a PR stunt, just a performance, and Vladimir Putin possibly on board with it?
I mean, who knows? I mean, these people play so many, games and counter games and tricks and so on and so forth that, it's really almost not worth analyzing what they're saying. I know for sure that Prigozhin has lied on many occasions, and so there's no reason to believe that he's not lying now. Mm-hmm. This is war. For them to actually telegraph their real intentions is even less likely. But the most important thing we need to understand is that there is some type of problem. If they're fighting with each other in the open, there is some type of problem inside the Russian military, which is both obvious from their fighting, but also obvious from the number of dead bodies that are turning up on the Russian side and the number of tanks that are being destroyed and so on and so forth.
And then there's the issue of that drone attack on the Kremlin last week. I mean, the Kremlin says the U.S., Ukraine masterminded that. Then there's also, a feeling that it could be some, anti-Kremlin, anti-Putin group that might be behind it. And this is what the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee said about the incident on CNN earlier today.
I believe that they're an attempt to distract everyone in Russia from the fact that Vladimir Putin is losing horribly in Ukraine, and he needs to withdraw. He needs to allow Ukraine to restore their territorial borders and the integrity of their country.
All right. So again, a possible stunt, a diversion?
Well, yes, definitely. I mean, look at this. The Kremlin is the most well-defended place in the whole planet. For the idea that two drones could somehow just get in there and explode over the Kremlin is laughable. This is clearly some type of orchestrated stunt in order to create a narrative. In my opinion, the narrative is more about escalating the war and giving the Russian people something to rally around. And the idea is that the Ukrainians, with the Americans backing, have tried to kill Putin. We won't let them, but that justifies us escalating further and perhaps even drafting more people, drafting more conscripts, which is one of the things that the Russians need to do very desperately. And so I don't believe for a second that this was done by the Ukrainians or by Russian partisans or by the Americans. This was done by Putin as a way of creating a domestic narrative.
All right, Bill Browder, we'll leave it there for now. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Now to the suburb of Allen, Texas, and another warning. Some things you're about to see are also disturbing. CNN obtained this photo we're showing you now that appears to show the dead shooter heavily armed and dressed in tactical gear. A senior law enforcement official and source familiar with the investigation tells CNN that he is 33-year-old Mauricio Garcia. In mere moments, he had killed 8 people and wounded 7 more. A dash cam video captures the moment the killer hops out of his car, and we are pausing it before you see him gun down men, women, and children on a busy sidewalk. A police officer already at the mall on an unrelated call took out the shooter. We have a lot of angles to cover in all of this. CNN's Ed Lavandera is at the scene of this senseless attack. Former Boston Police Commissioner Ed Davis is also with us to lend us his expertise. And CNN's Josh Campbell joins us by phone. Josh, let me go to you first. You have some new reporting on the shooter and some possible extremist motivations. What can you tell us?
Yeah, that's right, Jim. And I think it's worth pointing out that thus far, the Texas Department of Public Safety, which is the agency we're told is leading this investigation, has essentially been radio silent when it comes to information about the suspect. Obviously, the community there is wanting answers about who this person was. We've been working our sources, and I'm told by a law enforcement source that officials are investigating whether this Texas mall shooter was motivated by right-wing extremism. Now, I'm told that the suspect, who we know, of course, was shot and killed by a brave, heroic police officer there in Texas, likely saving countless other lives, that after the suspect was shot, authorities found that he had some type of insignia on his clothing that read the letters RWDS, which police believe stands for Right-Wing Death Squad. That same type of insignia and patch, RWDS, has been publicly seen by various members of extremist groups at rallies and at protests. And so, again, authorities are investigating that possible right-wing extremism angle. Now, furthermore, I'm told by a source that investigators have uncovered an extensive social media presence by this Texas shooter. Now, of course, he is deceased. He can't talk. Authorities will often have to try to fan out and gather as much evidence as they can to try to piece together that motive. Well, we are learning from this source that as part of that social media presence, authorities have found what are being described as neo-Nazi and white supremacist related posts and images that authorities believe that the suspect had shared online. So again, an extensive social media presence that authorities have been looking at, have been investigating, and they've uncovered these neo-Nazi and white supremacist related posts that they believe that the suspect himself had actually posted online. So again, there's still a lot, obviously, that we don't know about the suspect. Authorities tell us that they haven't zeroed in on one particular motive, but obviously this is very telling as they're gathering this evidence that you have him with this patch associated with right-wing extremism and this alleged online presence associated with Nazis and white supremacists. I'm also told from a source that, and if we take a look at that photo that was obtained by our colleague Ed Lavandera from a source at the scene, the photo where you actually see the suspect on the ground. This is after he was shot and killed. You see next to him this AR-15 style weapon. You can also see on his chest that there appear to be multiple additional magazines of ammunition. And I'm also told by a source that in the suspect's vehicle, authorities recovered multiple firearms. And so, again, you have to, it is chilling to think that but for that police officer who was there that sprung into action, this obviously could have been much, much worse. But a lot of investigation yet to be done, but we are, through our sources, beginning to learn a lot more about the suspect, Jim.
All right, Josh Campbell, thank you very much for that new information. We appreciate it. Let me go to Ed Lavandera. He's on the scene. And Ed, you have more reporting on the police search regarding Garcia. What can you tell us about that?
Well, we went to a neighborhood in Dallas that has an address that we believe is connected to the parents of Mauricio Garcia. We spent several hours there this morning speaking with neighbors, and these details that Josh is reporting on of possible connections to right-wing extremism really would be a shock to the neighbors who are around them. You know, many of them did not speak with this family directly. It was very, superficial kind of connections. They mostly would see him in passing and waving. They described him as someone who was polite. One neighbor did describe that he would often see him walking by himself with a hoodie on, head covered, often no matter how hot it might be there in his neighborhood in Dallas. But nothing that anyone got any indication that there would be this kind of potential behavior from their neighbor. But several neighbors did tell us that it had been several months since he had been living there at home with his parents. So that's where we were this morning. And here at the crime scene, Jim, you can see the area back into the parking lot of the outlet mall. This area is still cordoned off where investigators are working. And we've spoken with the source, a witness who was here yesterday when the shooting transpired and gave us a better indication of the gunman's movements as he arrived here at the outlet mall and began shooting people. We understand that the shooting took place very close to in front of the H&M store and then ended at a Fat Burger restaurant. But we spoke with a witness who was somewhere in the middle of that path, several hundred yards away, and he witnessed this gunman pass right before him. What did you see the gunman wearing? What did he look like?
He had on a black windbreaker. It had something written across the back. It looked like a P to start with. He had on a black ammo magazine vest on the front, 30 round type, looked like, and he was pretty much in black.
And the way he moved, you thought it was kind of like, was it, did
Well,
he have it, did he have
he wasn't running. He was more like deliberately moving. It's like so it's hard to explain, except, you know, he was under control.
And did he have his...
His gun was up and he was actually shooting in front of the store. We heard the shots as he went by shooting.
And that gentleman went on to tell us as he was escorted out of that building by law enforcement and eventually passed by the area where the gunman was shot, he did see several bodies there on the ground. And he also told us that it was just moments after he saw the gunman pass by him that it was the police officer who he saw that person pass by the window of the store where they're at and later presumably gunned down this suspect just several businesses down the path from where they were. Jim?
All right, Ed Lavandera, thank you very much for that. Let me go to Ed Davis for his expertise on all of this. Ed, what do you make of this new reporting coming in from Josh Campbell, our Josh Campbell reporting that a law enforcement source familiar with the investigation is telling CNN that this gunman may have been motivated by right-wing ideology and then it may have been active online sharing posts about neo-Nazis and that sort of thing. What does that tell you at this point?
Good afternoon, Jim. What it tells me is that we have still another case of someone who was known to have problems, right? Fringe players, whether it be extremism or mental health issues or alcohol issues. And they've decided to activate themselves and get access to very powerful weapons and unlimited amounts of ammunition, and decide to go out in a blaze of glory and kill all of these young children. I saw some of the pictures from the scene, and it's heartbreaking to see another tragedy occur, and to know that there are indicators, that there are lists that can be put together. There are enhanced checks that can be done for people who want to buy this type of equipment, and for a lot of reasons, we are incapable in this country of protecting our own citizens. It's just unconscionable to me.
And Ed, does it make any sense to you that we are not hearing from law enforcement officials today at a press conference? They're not holding a press conference today. We're having to obtain information about the latest in this investigation from our sources. Does that make any sense to you? I mean, I can't imagine why they would not do it, and I can't think of the last time we had a mass shooting like this where you didn't have law enforcement out there the next day giving the media, giving the country and the rest of the world the latest.
Right, Jim. It's a very old-fashioned response to a major tragedy like this. This is what used to happen in the 60s and 70s. Over the years, we've learned how important it is to get valid information out to people, because if the media doesn't have appropriate and valid information, they start to fill the void with other pieces of information that might not be correct. And the community is desperate to find out if they're safe. Believe me, I've been through this in my lifetime. They want to be assured by their public officials that this situation is in hand. So it really is, I think it's based on a police department's fear that they're going to say something wrong that's going to be used against them in the future. But really, you really have to show leadership here, grab the bull by the horns, go out there and give the people the valid information that you know exists, even if it's bad news, because if you don't do that, it's going to get worse every hour that goes by.
We don't often equate philosophers with bravery, but Bernard-Henri Lévy breaks the mold in many ways. Since the start of the war in Ukraine, he's traveled to many of the frontline locations we've all heard about in the news, places like Kharkiv, Kherson, Odessa, and Bakhmut. He went to bear witness and brought a film crew to document what he saw. The result is an impressive new documentary called Slava Ukraini, meaning Glory to Ukraine. It's out now in select theaters. Bernard-Henri Lévy, welcome. Great to have you.
Thank you, Farid.
I want to ask you about this issue of bravery just to begin with, because it's always struck me as one of it's sometimes underrated. When you think about, we often think about smarts and intelligence, but if you think of great leadership, like with Zelensky, bravery, courage is one of the most important things. Do you think that's trained? Do you think it's inborn?
It's one of the most important and one of the most forgotten. We were so surprised when Zelensky decided to stay. We were so surprised when the whole Ukrainian people stood at his side. It was absolutely unexpected. None of us waited that. And nevertheless, it happened. A whole people reconnected with the great tradition of brave citizenship, like in the beginning of America, like in Athens in the ancient Greece, like in the French Revolution. This is what happened in Ukraine. And this is one of the great events which we saw.
When you went on the front lines and you talked to these soldiers, they're up against a very formidable foe, and the Russians are hammering and they're doing things that are really we haven't seen since World War II, destroying whole cities, bombing the sewage plants and the water facilities and the hospitals. Are they losing their nerve? Are they losing their courage?
I never saw that. Maybe it happens, but I never saw that. I was in a lot of hot places, and what I saw is quiet bravery, not the stupid bravery, which is a fake one, going to the enemy, but a well-mastered bravery everywhere. No, losing their nerves, never. Protecting the weak, putting the old people under shelter, going to fetch them under fire. This I saw many times, and this is what I report in the documentary in many scenes.
You know that people look at the strategic situation from afar, and they say, "Look, the Ukrainians will make some gains in this coming counteroffensive, but at the end of the day, the Russians are dug in Crimea and in that core part of the Donbass that they took in 2014. So there will have to be some negotiation. There will have to be some settlement." What do you say?
I don't believe that. Number one, if there is a compromise, it will be a disaster for all of us. When you do compromise with someone who decided that we are his enemy and that he declared a total war against the whole civilized world, it's a very bad thing. A compromise with Hitler, a compromise with Putin is for all of us a bad thing, number one. Number two, I don't think it would be necessary. What I observed on the ground during these 6 months of shooting and of footage, each time the Ukrainians decided with their wise bravery to launch an offensive, they won. And sometimes, very often, the Russians did not even try to resist, in Kherson, for example. So when the Ukrainians will decide that they are strong enough, equipped enough to go to Donetsk, to go to Crimea, they will. And you will be surprised how little the Russians will resist. Number three, the only thing which is missing and which we have to do is to give the equipment and to give it strongly, quickly, and not in the incremental way, which is the motto and the doctrine of too many diplomats. If we give what they need, things can go quick and the war can stop and we can spare some human lives.
You are a big supporter of Emmanuel Macron in France. On this issue, do you think Macron is searching for a compromise, a solution? He still talks to Putin. Do you think he agrees with what you're saying?
I think so. I think that Macron never searched for a compromise with Putin. He spoke with him at the beginning, not to search a compromise, to appeal to what he believed could remain in his mad brain of Putin of reason. He tried to probably to explain to him that he was making an historical mistake, etc., but not to make a compromise. There is one point on which Macron never changed. Russia has to be defeated. Ukraine has to get the victory. And the victory means what Zelensky will say. Macron always said that. And I had the privilege, by the way, to be asked by Macron to be there in his last man-to-man meeting with Zelensky in Paris. They had a meeting 2 or 3 months ago. I was in the room with Andrei Yermak, President Zelensky, President Macron. And I heard and I saw the position of Macron was very clear. The victory has to be yours, President Zelensky. And what victory means, it's you to decide, not us, not diplomats, not America, not France, not Europe. It's your country, it's your combat, and it's your decision. And this is the position of France.
Bernard-Henri Lévy, always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Farid.